Welcome to the Word Potions Podcast. I'm Christopher King, and this is Strangers at Bars Sometimes Bite, Part 12. Gaze into the water and clearly visualize the one you wish to contact. I stared into the calm surface of water. It sat within the confines of the Felcher dark stone bowl. I imagined Thurtai and tried to remember as many details about him as I could. The thin stalk-like legs that came to sharp talons, his head with golden orbs for eyes, and tufts of soft, feathery hair. The water rippled, and suddenly, my own reflection wasn't there anymore. It was Thurtai. Who is it? Who was there? It's me, Hampton, the guy that you met with Lazuli in the cavern. I need your help, Thurtai. Castor imprisoned Lazuli. Keela is gravely injured, and I need to find a way to weaken or imprison Bactalis. If I do not, Castor will kill Lazuli and possibly myself. I paused to catch my breath, and Thurtai thought for a moment before he spoke. I've been searching for a weakness, and not many present themselves. Bactalis is a formidable foe, but he is not impregnable. Meet me outside of Magistra near the West Gate in 2 hours' time. We can discuss what we need to do then. Thurtai waved his hand in front of my vision, and the water turned to liquid. I stood up and scanned the room. Besides the sword leaning against the table, the room was sparsely furnished. This room was just a temporary living space. Castor had given it to me for use after I had been conscripted to help him. My room sat on the first floor, carved into the stone wall of the cavern, and lay underneath the south terrace. I left my room and joined the flow of Elvar, following the curve of the cavern. I angled my way toward a large staircase that had been carved into the cavern's wall. It led up to the apex of the ceiling. The staircase was one of 4 that spiraled up through each floor. I climbed to the 3rd level, then when I tried to enter the terrace, a guard stopped me, putting his hand on my chest. Stop right there. This is the Terrace of Nobles. Nobody is allowed in without the High Noble's permission. I need to speak with Castor, I said. A second guard disappeared back into a set of rooms and returned momentarily. You're good to enter, he stated. I followed the narrow stone passageway back into a large room. The high ceiling was at odds to the many other living quarters around Magistra, and the tapestries on the wall added a bit of finery that made the space more regal. Castor sat on a large stone chair that had been carved out of the floor. Its high back and wide seat were covered in algaki skins and could accommodate any size Elvar. Castor lounged on the seat, a platter of food sitting across his lap. He was eating in a slow, deliberate manner. Male and female Elvar stood around him, some holding platters of food, others pitchers of some dark red liquid. Ah, welcome, my seeker of secrets. Have you found the weakness of the demon Bactalis? No, sir. In fact, I was wondering if I could speak to Lazuli Elegant. He had some information I need in order to properly begin my investigation. Castor's eyes lost their spark of excitement, and he waved his hand in a lazy shooing motion. Is that all? Yes, that is fine. Guard. An Elvar walking in wearing a rifle slung over his shoulder and a thick sloping brow that made him look like he was scowling when he was expressionless. Take this half-being to Lazuli, and remember, Hampton, we have 6 days before I execute you both. His comment caused me to pause where I stood. I sighed and bowed before following the guard out of the room. He's the worst, I said to the guard, when we were out of earshot. He just grunted, but I thought I saw agreement in his eyes. We left the 3rd floor terrace, following the curves of the staircase down to the 1st floor. I looked out over the 3rd floor railing, gazing over Magistra. People walked about their business, but I sensed an overall tone of fear in the air. Usually there had been sounds of laughing and talking, intertwined with city sounds. However, most of the Elvar out and about seemed to move quickly without much talking. It was understandable. Their once safe haven had been breached, the enemy making it inside their walls and wreaking havoc. When we stepped off the staircase, the guard led me to the cave entrance that I had previously been jailed in. A guard stood outside, clutching a rifle at the ready. My guide stopped and spoke quietly to the Elvar standing guard. After a few seconds, the jail guard nodded and turned, leading us into the cave. Castor's guard gave me a curt nod, then turned and began walking back toward the staircase we had just vacated. I was led down a narrow stone staircase to a table that held a book. When we stepped off the staircase, the guard led me to the cave entrance that I had previously been jailed in. Guards stood outside, clutching a rifle at the ready. My guide stopped and spoke quietly to the Elvar standing guard. After a few seconds, the jail guard nodded and turned, leading us into the cave. Castor's guard gave me a curt nod, then turned and began walking back toward the staircase we had just vacated. I was led down a narrow stone staircase to a table that held a book. "Sign in, please," said the Elvar guard. A large room had been hewn out of solid stone, and 8 large cells had been created. 4 on the left and 4 on the right. Bars of metal had somehow been pounded into the ground, separating the prisoners from the guards. We walked to the last cell, and the guard paused, gesturing to the one on the left. "This is him," stated the guard. "Make it quick." "Lazuli?" I called. "Hey, Hampton, come to bust me out?" Lazuli casually lay on the cot, twisting together 2 pieces of straw. His face was puffy and discolored. Dried blood lay crusted underneath his nose. "Whoa, what happened to you?" I asked, staring at the face before me. "Someone slipped when dropping off my dinner. They slipped about 5 to 10 times, said Lazuli. I turned to the guard. "Is this how you treat people in your care?" The guard grinned. "Trainees shouldn't be concerned with how they're treated." I sighed. "Are you going to be okay, Lazuli?" "Just get me out of here soon. Prisons aren't exactly my thing." I glanced at the guard from the corner of my eye. He was watching me intently, holding the rifle at the ready. "Do it. You can take him." Not with him on full alert. He'll shoot me as soon as I take a step toward him. I thought back to the blade. I remembered the room layout. Only one guard behind me. If only I could get the Elvar to drop his guard. "Lazuli, are you sure you're okay?" I asked the question, putting emphasis on the word sure. I stared at Lazuli hard, hoping he would get my hint. "All right, time's up," said the guard, stepping forward. Lazuli rolled off the bed and began groaning loudly. The guard had stepped forward, presumably to push me toward the entrance of the cave. However, now he raised his rifle, pointing it at Lazuli. The barrel of the rifle was pointed just past my head. I smiled to myself. Now this I can work with. I waited a second for the guard's full focus to be on Lazuli, then casually spun around to my left, lifting my elbow over the barrel of the rifle. I trapped the gun in my armpit and punched the guard in the face with the same movement. A surprised look crossed the guard's face as the gun was wrenched from his grip. He fell to the floor, dazed from my strike, and cracked his head on the hard stone. I checked the guard to make sure he still had a pulse, then grabbed the keys. "All right, Lazuli, let's get you out of here." Lazuli grinned a nasty smile. "I think I need a new outfit," said Lazuli. He quickly exchanged clothes with the Elvar guard, then he tied him to the bed and gagged him. I hoped the guard rotation wasn't going to happen too soon. We were going to need some extra time to make our escape. "We need to leave right now. Thurtai is waiting outside the city. He has information on how to stop Baktalis," I said as we climbed the stairs leading out of the Elvar prison. "I need to check on Keela first. She's my only bloodkin left," said Lazuli. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded to him. "Lead the way." Lazuli told me there were 2 medical facilities in Magistra. The biggest one handled commonplace injuries, and the smaller one handled specialized cases. Lazuli said the smaller one would be more likely to be treating Keela, so we made our way there as quickly as we could. We arrived 15 minutes later. It was a short cave with a wide mouth, large enough to fit 10 Elvar walking side by side through it. Crystal blue caves of water shimmered in small patches dotted around the floor. A bed beside each pool was situated so as to be right next to the edge of the water. Some patients lay in the bed groaning, while others lay in the water. No one seemed to notice us as we walked in. We walked from bed to bed, examining each face until we reached Keela's body near the back of the cave. Keela was in the water, head drifting to the side. Her body was held up by a rope that ran underneath her armpits, allowing her to float in the water without sinking or turning over. The pool pulsed, a slow, steady beat. I assumed it was in time with her heart. Lazuli knelt down next to the pool and brushed a strand of hair out of Keela's face. I could see the worry in his eyes. "You're going to be okay," whispered Lazuli. "I'll come back for you, just like I always have. Get well quickly, sister." Keela didn't answer, but a movement of her eyes underneath her lids was the only signal that she'd heard. "We gotta go," I whispered to Lazuli. He grunted and stood to his feet. I led the way toward the west gate and hoped it would be relatively unguarded. It wasn't. 4 Elvar gate guards watched the tunnel leading away from the city, and 2 priests of Evlis sat nearby, chanting passages of holy script. Guards eyed us as we walked up. No one in or out of the city, unless with a pass from Castor himself, stated one of the guards. Lazuli began talking in a quick, excited manner. There's been an attack on the east gate. They need reinforcements. As you can see, I've taken some damage to the face. We were sent to swap with some fresh guards. Lazuli sounded genuine enough, but the guards didn't seem to be convinced. They stood without moving a muscle. The lead guard was about to say something when Lazuli swung up his rifle to bear on the speaker. Enough. We are leaving, and you will open the gate, said Lazuli. The guard that Lazuli was pointing his gun at gritted his teeth and began to shake his head. Lazuli stepped forward and smashed the butt of his rifle into the guard's face, sending him toppling to the ground. Lazuli stepped over him and slowly advanced to the other guards. Drop your weapons, or your friend here gets his throat cut, and I open fire on you dredging pissants, said Lazuli in a commanding voice. I drew Kilzar and held the tip inches from the downed Elvar's throat. Finally, some action, said Kilzar. Now open this gate. Me and my companion are leaving. One of the guards slowly reached forward and pushed a lever next to the gate. Unbarring the doors. We walked out and faded into the darkness as we rounded a bend in the tunnel. Your people are going to hate us if we keep hurting them, I said. Nah, they'll be fine. They should stop getting in our way. Lazuli pulled the rifle strap over his shoulder. A few torches set into the wall illuminated the area for a few hundred feet. Then the tunnel turned and the torches petered out. I paused at the last torch and pulled it out of its holder. I held it high in my left hand. Slowly, I began making my way through the tunnel following Lazuli. Near the gate, the tunnel had been wide open with plenty of space above and beside us, but after about a mile, it encroached on all sides. I could walk with both hands outstretched on either side, and my fingers would brush the tunnel walls. Something shuffled ahead of me, and my arm reached down to grip the handle of Kilzar, almost involuntarily. I yanked the sword free from its scabbard, and Lazuli raised his rifle to point down the tunnel. I cautiously moved forward and saw a dark shape slip back around another bend in the tunnel. I moved forward as fast as I could, attempting to catch the shape. Thurtai, is that you? The shape stopped and turned around. It was indeed Thurtai, but he looked in bad shape. His clothing was bedraggled, his hair seemed messy, and his eyes shifted back and forth. Whoa, are you okay? I asked, as I skidded to a halt. Thurtai nodded. Greetings, Hampton. Lazuli, being near Baktalis is unsafe at the moment. He consumes more and more of my clan to draw power into himself. We need to hurry and travel to the surface to find my brother. He's the keeper of treasures for my clan. He is also an avid researcher. If anyone knows Baktalis' weakness, it's him. I assented and allowed Thurtai to take the lead. Thurtai, what is the surface like? I asked. Lazuli spoke before Thurtai could respond. It's a vast desert. Nothing grows except prickly bushes. Thurtai watched Lazuli as he spoke, then shook his head when the Elvar had finished speaking. That's not true. A large portion of the area above these tunnels are desert. However, we are traveling to the lush and verdant lands of my people. Lazuli scowled. I thought the whole surface was one big desert. At least, that's what I've always heard. How can this not be true? Our people never seem to speak when our kinds meet. We only seem to fight, said Thurtai. You only ever come down here to attack us, growled Lazuli. Thurtai stayed silent. He led the way, occasionally stopping to look at scratch markings on the walls near intersections. He moved uphill at a steady pace, sometimes going down, only to go back up at a steep incline for several hundred feet. At one point in our journey, we discovered a small side passage that led us to a pool of clear water full of fish. We stopped at the pool while Thurtai refilled his water flasks. Lazuli dived into one such pool and soon returned with a fish clutched in either hand. I soon dozed off after eating my fish. I was roused several hours later and we continued our march. During my stay in Magistra, I hadn't been walking about as much and my feet had grown unaccustomed to such long travel times. It was at the end of our second rest that Thurtai told us we were getting close. We arrived at a sandy path that led up at a steep incline. Thurtai told us to wait and scouted ahead. He had warned us that many Felcher used this entrance. A group could very well be camped outside. Thurtai was gone for what seemed like forever, but he came back and gave us the all-clear. We hiked up the incline and soon found ourselves at the entrance to the tunnel. I stepped out of the cave and into the canopy of the night sky. I fell to my knees, feeling the freedom of the open space. I'd been in tunnels so long it almost felt strange being in the open world. A warm breeze wafted past, ruffling my hair, carrying new and fresh smells. I couldn't quite place the scents, but they were pleasant and filled me with joy. After so long in cave systems, I'd grown used to the damp smell and the sameness that followed me everywhere I went. I glanced at the night sky and exclaimed at the beauty of the stars. They twinkled and winked at me, seeming to welcome me to the surface. It had been almost a year since I saw their beautiful sight. I glanced at Lazuli. Lazuli was looking around himself, almost frightful. Evlis, I hate this. Everything's so wide open. At least on Earth there were forests I could travel through and buildings I could hide inside. Thirtai just shrugged and strode out into the sand. Stay close. There are creatures out here at night, and we need to travel quickly in order to preserve our water rations. I jumped to my feet and dusted the sand off my knees. I followed Thirtai, and we began walking out into the dunes. I glanced back. A lone outcropping of stone jutted into the night sky, almost lost to sight. I held my torch up high and silently bid farewell to the confines of the Elvar cave system. The novelty of the desert soon wore off. Walking was much harder going up and down dunes, and I tired quickly. I heard chittering in the air above us, and slowed to look up. Luminescent shapes glided and coiled in the air. I stopped, mesmerized by the beauty. Thirtai grabbed my shoulder and pushed me on. Don't stop. Those things are carrion eaters. If you stop or slow, they may mistake you for a deceased creature and attack. They can strip an Algaki in 10 minutes. They only come out at night because it's too hot for them by day. I shivered and resumed my pace, spurred on by the chittering that occasionally came into earshot when we slowed. Thirtai pushed us mercilessly. I spotted several suitable camping spots, but I didn't want to get eaten in my sleep, so I kept my mouth shut. We'd been marching for what felt like forever, when I dimly noticed through my haze of exhaustion that the sky was beginning to lighten. The air began to grow even warmer than it had been before. I put out the torch and stowed it on the same belt that held Kilzar. We are still many miles from the forest. The sun is rising and traveling will grow much more difficult. However, stopping is not an option. Thirtai turned back toward us as we spoke, and we stopped momentarily to sip from his flask. I nodded and noticed that the stars were beginning to disappear. Lazuli didn't look as tired as I felt, but he glanced around, scanning the vast expanse surrounding us in short, twitchy glances. What's the matter? I asked. Ground is so soft. One might dig and bury a whole army of creatures, only to explode and envelop us in a trap. I looked around and raised an eyebrow at him. Don't go crazy, Lazuli. You'll start to see enemies where there are none. Thirtai turned to us. You were speaking about the dreaded dune flower, correct? Its massive petals lay just underneath the surface of the sand, and when it senses the vibrations of prey upon its petals, they close and envelop them in steel-hard walls that slowly fill with a dissolvent. Remember this. Ground that's yellow, flowers burrow. Ground that's gray, do not stray. Ground that's soft, stay aloft. Ground that's red, something's dead. Lazuli's eyes widened and he glanced around again. And what does that mean? Thirtai replied, explaining the rhyme. The first rhyme is how to spot a dune flower. If you see patches of smooth yellow, then be wary, because a dune flower may be rooted there. The second rhyme tells you how to navigate through a dune flower patch. Usually the sand will be gray in between flowers due to the moisture it sheds when digesting animals. The third rhyme warns of sand that is extra soft, could be a sinkhole. And the fourth means to avoid any animals, dead or dying. Parasites love to hide in their carcasses and impregnate an unwary passerby. The third rhyme warns of sand that is extra soft, it could be a sinkhole. And the fourth means to avoid any dead or dying creatures. Parasites love to hide in their carcasses and impregnate an unwary passerby. We lost a whole village to a careless felcher that got infected with a carrion eater larva. They died in their sleep, minds eaten by the parasitic larva. Lazuli grunted, and I felt slightly nauseous. The higher the sun rose, the hotter it seemed to become. We'd been walking for hours, and the sun beat down on us from on high. Any exposed flesh soon began to feel tender. I wanted to stop and lay down. At this point, I was stumbling along more than walking. Lazuli was showing signs of weirdness as well, but Thirtai kept trudging along, seemingly untroubled by the heat and the constantly shifting sand. "We need a break," I croaked. "No time," called back Lazuli. "We are almost there." We crested an especially high dune, and I could see something in the distance. The heat waves obscured my vision, but knowing that we were almost to our resting point gave me the last bit of remaining energy to continue on. Soon, a dense packing of trees came into view. I stumbled into the tree line and sank to my feet, thankfully laying down on the shade of the tropical foliage. Thirtai pulled out his water flask and handed it to me, then to Lazuli. Between the both of us, we emptied the flask. "A stream flows nearby. Perhaps we should go to it." I nodded and got to my feet. It was a slow process. My body told me not to get up, that rest would be better. I forced myself up, and we traveled a few hundred feet farther in. A narrow stream gurgled through a sandy bed, and I walked into it, pulling off my sword belt and leaving it lying on the soft moss next to the stream. I collapsed into the stream as I let it flow over and around me. Sand, grit, and sweat was pulled from my body. My mind cleared and I was able to focus. I sat up out of the stream and gasped for breath. "God, that feels so good," I breathed. Lazuli groaned as he did the same. Only Thirtai sat on the bank of the river for a moment. I got out of the stream, soaked. It was warm enough where I didn't care if I had to keep walking with clothes that were soaking wet. "How far till your brother's place?" I asked. "Not too far," was Thirtai's response. We traveled through the trees for a few more hours. I couldn't complain. The trees afforded us plenty of shade. Thirtai didn't push us as hard as he had when we were in the desert, for which I was thankful. We arrived at a cliff overlooking a large village. A group of wide buildings sat clustered around in a semicircle. Thirtai made his way toward the village and motioned for me and Lazuli to wait at the tree line. On getting close to the village, I immediately noticed the people walking about. They were Felcher, but wore baggy clothing and carried farming tools or pushed carts around. A few small Felcher children ran about playing. I watched curiously as the small village went about its business. At one point, I saw a large band of warriors troop into the village, with a great chest carried between them. They stopped in front of the largest building. A Felcher came out and greeted the warriors. After they had dismounted from their Elgaki, they carried the chest into the building and didn't reappear for a great length of time. When they came back, they did so without the chest. "This is fascinating, Lazuli. It's hard to think of them as people when you're staring at them in a dark tunnel." Lazuli squinted and just watched the village, a frown creasing the corners of his lips. We waited for Thirtai to return, but it was long past midday when he did. Thirtai introduced the new Felcher as the shaman Quetzal. He's the one I'd seen greeting the warriors. "I understand some damned fool has summoned Baktalis into this world," said Quetzal. I nodded, while Lazuli just grunted and looked around uncomfortably. "I also understand that you wish to send him back to where he came from." I nodded. "He's causing great destruction to both of our people." The shaman Quetzal offered me a bundle wrapped in furs. I took the bundle and almost dropped it. A dark force spilled out from within the folds. I gently unwrapped it and stared at a blade about the length of my forearm. It was half the size of Kilzar. It was jet black and gleamed in the sunlight. "This is the blade Bakris, which means to snare. Anyone killed with this blade has the soul ripped away from the ether and trapped inside of it," stated Quetzal. I stared at the blade for a long moment, following the curves of the intricately worked metal. I tried to hand it to Lazuli, but he shied away from its terrifying aura. "I'm not touching that thing with a 10-foot spear," he said. I turned to Thirtai. He shook his head, doing what I assumed was a Felcher grimace. "Even one such as I have limits. The Bakris blade is not for me to wield." "I guess it falls to me then." I picked up the Bakris blade and buckled it next to Kilzar. "Get that thing off me! Get it away!" Kilzar's voice exploded in my head, so violently I fell to the ground shaking. Kilzar let loose one last whimper and seemed to pull in on himself, withdrawing from my mind. Lazuli, Thirtai, and Quetzal stared at me, surprise written on their faces. I lay where I'd fallen for a few more seconds, then gingerly rolled to my feet. "Don't let that thing touch Kilzar," was all I said as I slowly got to my feet. I scooped up the Bakris blade and tied it to my opposite hip, making sure it was secure. My stomach roiled at the touch of the blade, and a bad smell seemed to linger just at the back of my nostrils. "Anything I should know about using the blade on Baktalis?" I asked. "Yes, you must pierce the center of its being where the soul is housed. If not, then all you will be doing is inflicting physical damage that it can heal from. and I suggest killing it quickly. The longer you wait, the stronger it becomes. I must be off. Good luck on defeating that demon, said Quetzal. Quetzal and Thurtai bowed to each other, then Quetzal was gone. Lazuli scuffed the earth with his foot. I'm worried about the High Lord Castor. He's not just going to allow us back into Magistra. He'll most likely kill us before he does that, I said. The scowl on Lazuli's face deepened. Then he stood up straight. Let's do it. Let's kill Castor. I shook my head. I don't think I can help you. Killing a high noble seems extreme. Thurtai snorted, then turned and walked towards the small brook that trickled and gurgled over rocks in a merry sing-song way. He refilled his water bottles and fished out 2 of the other containers for us to fill. We have time to plan what we want to do on the trip back. Remember, Bogtalis is the real threat. We made camp in the woods that night. Thurtai trapped a small rodent-like creature that proved to be quite delicious. I listened to the sounds of the forest around me. It was not unlike the forest back home. Things moved in the underbrush. Trees creaked and groaned while insects trilled. Thank you for listening to the Word Potions podcast. Tune back in next week for the next episode. If you like what you heard, consider subscribing, leaving a like, or sending us a message with your thoughts. Have a great day.